Breaking news today out of Seattle, in case you haven't heard, first reported from ESPN's Adam Schefter, Pete Carroll is out as head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Some will say fired, but he has been reassigned within the front office. This was the official statement from Jody Allen shortly after the news broke. It reads like this: after thoughtful meetings and careful consideration for the best interests of the franchise, we have amicably agreed with Pete Carroll that his role will evolve from head coach to remain with the organization as an advisor. Pete is the winningest coach in Seahawks history, brought the city its first Super Bowl title, and created a tremendous impact over the past 14 years on the field and in the community. His expertise in leadership and building a championship culture will continue as an integral part of our organization moving forward. Pete will always be a beloved member of the Seahawk family. Pete Carroll out as head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. This is my initial reaction to this. There will be much more to say as the day goes along. At first flush, for those of you who follow me on Twitter or have been watching the show or listening to the podcast, I have said on the record for over 2 months that it was time for change. I had a very emotional episode, I think after the second 49ers loss, where I got a little choked up, because I love Pete Carroll. Everyone should. But it was clear that it was time for change, that the NFL, especially offensively, had evolved and that his defensive philosophies weren't keeping up. And there's a conversation to be had as well about whether his team building and interpersonal motivation and the win forever philosophy and some of those things that had served him so well and led to a championship team just were falling on deaf ears, weren't landing the way that they used to, especially with a young roster. And that the league had evolved offensively and that his defenses weren't keeping up. But I was also on record as saying emphatically, I didn't think it would happen. I didn't think Jody Allen was prepared to make this move yet. Incidentally, I was doing a live stream on the PSF app with Dana O'Gorman today, kind of wrapping up the season. And this news broke literally 1 minute after we stopped. I logged off the live stream, logged into Twitter, and boom, there was the report. Lots of speculation already about what's going to happen next. I was supposed to have Corbin Smith of All Seahawks and the Locked On Seahawks podcast on the show right now. Clearly, he's busy at the moment, but he has agreed to come on at some point today. So stay tuned to the channel. Stay tuned to my Twitter at Seahawks Forever. But my initial thoughts are this, and then we'll get into this much deeper later in the day. Speculation immediately centered around Dan Quinn, the former Seahawks defensive coordinator, won the Super Bowl with him, went on to Atlanta, took the Falcons to a Super Bowl, has led the Dallas Cowboys defense for the last couple of years. He's certainly a guy who's been there, done that, has ties to the area, is defensive-minded. And the front office may feel like that's the biggest issue with this team and this roster. I mean, we pretty much all agree, right? And so they may be focused on fixing the defense. There has been speculation for the better part of the year that this was always going to be plan B, that Dan Quinn could have had a head coaching job last year, chose to stay in Dallas. Some speculated it was because Mike McCarthy was on thin ice there, and if he was fired, he would take over in Dallas. But there's always been the thought that he had his eye on this job. If that is the hire, he will have his detractors. There are some who feel he failed in Atlanta. He didn't show enough as a head coach, that he really hasn't been that great in Dallas, that defense sometimes has been shredded. The Seahawks move the ball pretty much at will against them, and that he just lucked into an elite player in Micah Parsons. My initial reaction to that would be it would all depend on who the offensive coordinator is, wouldn't it? But also, we don't know how this front office is going to think. Presumably, John Schneider is still in charge now. And one of the many questions that we have to ask now is, will John Schneider get full control of the organization? You would imagine, and football operations, you would imagine he would, unless they go after a big fish. Is Jim Harbaugh in the mix? And this is where the unknown comes into play, because there isn't enough history for us to know how Jody Allen operates. When Paul Allen was alive, There was a year that Jay Glazer reported that Pete Carroll was considering retirement. I think this was when things kind of started to dip after the Super Bowl years. I want to say 17 or 18. And that Paul Allen was on a hunting trip or a vacation or something, but that he had a list already prepared of coaches he would go after in the event that Pete Carroll ever decided to move on. And there were 3 names on that list. I'll never forget it. It was Nick Saban, Bill Cowher, and Jim Harbaugh. Does Jody think like Paul? Would Jim Harbaugh find some appeal in coming back to the NFC West to face the 49ers twice a year and try to make up that ground against a team that's the best team in the NFC? Is that the kind of challenge he wants? Or would he take one of these jobs where you can go to the Chargers and inherit an elite quarterback in Justin Herbert? Or perhaps take one of these other jobs from a team in the top 10, Washington Commanders, come to mind, the Raiders, where they have a shot at one of these outstanding quarterback prospects that he can groom. Fascinating stuff. Or does the organization view what's happening around the league, the evolution of offenses, the takeover, essentially, of the coaching ranks by these young offensive minds, and do they target a guy like Ben Johnson out of Detroit, Bobby Slowick of the Houston Texans, someone of that ilk, Frank Smith of the Miami Dolphins? We don't know. And this may not be Jody Allen driving the ship. This could be Burt Cold. Remember, I had Chris Clough on the show yesterday. Go back now and watch that interview again in lieu of what's happening right now. Because I asked Chris, hey, they haven't had their end of the season meeting yet. The Seahawks do things a little bit differently than other organizations. They're not quick to react. They don't make knee-jerk decisions. Could they be more thoughtful about this? Is there still a chance that Pete could be removed as head coach? And he said, yeah, there is still a chance, because Burt Cold, who runs the sports division for Vulcan Enterprises, hang on one second. Could he have been driving this? And does he think differently? Because he was behind the decision to move on from Mike Holmgren. As Chris detailed yesterday, basically crafted a lowball offer they knew he would refuse so that they could save face and they would move on from Mike Holmgren. They handed the job at the time to Jim Mora, who was coach in waiting. But then what did they do next? They went after a big fish, and they went after Pete Carroll. How much of that was Paul Allen? How much influence did Burt Cold have in that decision? They may think differently now. If it is Dan Quinn, I would advise you all to hold your horses and not overreact, because to me, it would all depend on who's his offensive coordinator. With the Chargers coaching staff now looking for work in LA, Kellen Moore is once again available. He was the offensive coordinator in Dallas when Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator, until Mike McCarthy wanted to take over play calling duties again and removed more of his duties. Would he bring Kellen Moore back to the Northwest? How interested would you be in that? Lots of moving parts. Very fascinating. What does this mean for the future of Geno Smith? Does it change the equation? My initial response, hell yes, it does. I have been pounding the table and fighting tooth and nail, debating people the last few days on the fact that Geno Smith's a good quarterback, one you can win with, not the problem in Seattle, not right now. And while I'm wholeheartedly support bringing in a young quarterback, I'm moving forward with Geno Smith, and I'm trying to fix the defense. New coaches have new ideas, and this may change all of that. A new coach may need some new personnel. They may need to be much more aggressive now in clearing cap space. Much more aggressive. And one of the avenues they can achieve that is by, well, the simple thing would be to cut Geno Smith before February 16th, and they would save about $12.7 million, I think it is, in a non-guaranteed salary they would gain against the salary cap with a $17 million cap hit. Does this make them more likely they move on from Jamal Adams now, after Pete Carroll was adamant that he still thought he was a great player and was still part of the plans moving forward? Quandre Diggs. Does this make it less likely Bobby Wagner comes back? Jordan Brooks, is he the type of linebacker that fits into the system, whatever system the new coach is going to want to run? Leonard Williams. I think he's scheme versatile, especially given that they gave up a second-round pick for him. If he likes the new coaching staff, they may really prioritize bringing him back, but they may want to clean the decks as much as they can and start over a little bit. I don't see a full rebuild because there's too many young players under rookie contracts on this team. But I think it definitely raises questions about the quarterback. Now, someone like Dan Quinn may be more inclined to keep a veteran like Geno because he wants to focus on fixing the defense first and thinks Geno's good enough to win with. Does this raise the possibility that Drew Lock is brought back on a cheaper contract to be the bridge quarterback and the Seahawks get more aggressive about drafting a young guy? Or do they believe in Lock enough to hand the keys to him and move on in that way? Which leads me to my final question I'm going to touch on here, and then we'll get into some other stuff later today. Does John Schneider now get full control of football operations? You would think so, presumably. If Pete's only going to be in an advisory role, that statement from Jody Allen implies that he loses his title of executive vice president. If he's just going to be an advisor, how much say does he really have? I found it interesting that when Pete signed his last extension through 2025, which we now know with recent reporting was really through 2024 with an option, that John Schneider, within weeks, signed his own extension, and it ran through 2027. So John was always, barring a total house cleaning, was always going to get an opportunity to hire his own head coach, and now he has that. What direction does he want to go? How much say does he have in the coaching decision? You would think quite a bit. I would think that if John is being told that he's not going to get full control of the football operations, that he'd be putting his resume together. Lots of moving parts. Fascinating what's going to happen. And again, I will say it on the record. I have wanted this move to happen for a couple of months now. And I think we talked last offseason about whether it would be the right choice. I didn't think it would. Now that it does, all possibilities are on the table. I will caution you with this, though, before we go. The grass isn't always greener. Look around the league. There are young coaches who just 2, 3, 4 years ago were the hot candidates that everybody was clamoring for, that some of you wanted us to fire Pete Carroll for then and hire, who have been fired this offseason, or who are about to be fired, or who are on thin ice heading into next year, right? Arthur Smith, Brandon Staley, Brian Daboll is on thin ice, Matt Eberflus in Chicago. They cleaned house today with their whole staff. It's not change for the sake of change. And some of you say things like this when it comes to the quarterback or the head coach. Well, anything would be better. No, it wouldn't. We don't know. And this is a very, very risky move on the part of the Seahawks in some way, because as much as I think Pete Carroll's ceiling had diminished and that his philosophies weren't going to be able to get us back to another Super Bowl, I also think that his floor was very safe. And that as long as, if Pete stayed for another year, you could look at, being competitive again, but probably being stuck in that middle ground. We shall see how that works out now moving forward. I don't know if that's telling or not. I thought that was some of my outro music. But you know what? That kind of works, doesn't it? Anyway, I am still hoping to get Corbin Smith on the show today. He said he'd be able to do a hit with me. Can't wait to dig into Corbin's mind and his thoughts on this process. He is a credentialed reporter who covers Seahawks. He's in those press conferences. He's covering the team. He's on the sideline. He's talking to coaches and players. Can't wait to get his insight. So look for that later today on both the audio podcast and here on the channel. And then I will do a live stream tonight where I take all your questions, all your ideas, and we'll explore it for as long as we need to talk this out. We'll get emotional. We'll work this out. We'll do some therapy, and we'll look at things moving forward. This makes tomorrow's show even more exciting. John Gilbert of the Field Goals website is going to join me. He's a bit of a salary cap guru, and I think things just got a lot more interesting in that area as far as potentially clearing some cap space. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever for all the updates. Like this video, subscribe to the video on YouTube so that you get, or subscribe to the channel so you get all new notifications of new episodes. I need to calm down a little bit, stop drinking coffee, and take a deep breath and kind of read some of the stuff that's out there. But the Seahawks are in the game now when it comes to the coaching cycle. They are potentially in the game now when it comes to a franchise quarterback in the first round. This shapes up to be the most interesting offseason in 16 years. Stay tuned here for everything you need to know and for my opinion and to take your opinions too. Hop into the comments. Tell me what you think. And stay tuned because I'll be back later today with a lot more, including some thoughts from Corbin Smith. So until then, forever and always, go Hawks. We'll see you soon.